I'm Steve with the JEO Consulting Group, our Community Engagement Director. And just a little bit of background, because I know a lot of you are very familiar with JEO. I recognize some people in the room. I am not a converted engineer that does public involvement work. I have a career, over 35 years of experience working in public affairs, public involvement, government relations, facilitation, dispute resolution work. And I've been doing that, like I said, for 36 years now. And 25 of those last years of that 36 have been uniquely focused on environmental issues. So I am not an expert, I'll tell you right now, I am not an expert on wellhead protection and nitrate. But I have worked on a multitude of Superfund projects around the United States. I was very involved in helping to put together the whole concept that the EPA uses for restoration advisory boards. I've facilitated restoration advisory boards all over the United States. Done a lot of work in the area of the National Environmental Policy Act. So I've got a background working with environmental scientists, engineers, public health officials, and how that relates to communicating and doing outreach with the public and getting the public involved in your processes, and whether it's rulemaking or you're doing a study that requires public input. So I've kind of been there and done that. A little more of my background, I'm a former chief of environmental public affairs for the National Guard. So I've run these national public involvement programs for all 50 states, and just got back from Japan doing some environmental work over there, where I'm assigned as an Army reservist. And I've got a lot of issues down in Okinawa they're getting ready to move the Marines out of there and move a lot of them over to Guam. I'm helping them to address some of those issues as a part-time responsibility when I put my uniform on. What else can I tell you? This risk communication topic that I'm going to bring up, I'll drill down into what it really is and why it might be helpful for you in addressing wellhead protection. But I think the more important thing, I have had the good fortune to work with the world's leading experts that actually established this body of science. So if you ever want to look up risk communication after this course, Google Dr. Vincent Cavello, Dr. Peter Sandman, Dr. Karen Chess. They're kind of the godfathers and godmothers of this area of science. And I know a lot of you, especially with technical backgrounds, probably think that everything that I would do in public affairs and communication is an art. And there certainly is an art to it, but this is a hardcore science. A science that any engineer would respect. And we'll cover that in a little bit. So I just want to let you know I've had that great opportunity to work with those people over the last 25 years. And having been a practitioner of public involvement work, and working some really contentious environmental issues where there was a lot of suspicion, a lot of doubt, lack of trust, and going in and using traditional kind of, if you will, PR techniques that I had in my tool belt at that point, and going in and trying to just generally pass information to people and think that would work and that people would understand, and find out that actually that almost was like throwing gas on a fire by just giving people information, and realizing there's actually more to how you impart technical information to lay audiences, particularly if there's a chance that the issue will get people emotionally charged. Okay, and then going back to those same audiences where we almost got lynched at a public meeting, and applying risk communication technique, and actually see a profound night and day difference in how people reacted to us passing the message. So it had a lot to do with messenger, all of that. But this science-based approach will achieve a desired result if you're trying to get people to, particularly lay audiences, to try to get on the same page with you. Okay? So what I'm going to cover very briefly, we've just got an hour together. What I'm covering with you is an extract from primarily what was a 9-week course that used to be taught by Dr. Cavello at Columbia University, that then further got boiled down to a 3-day course that I'd been training and teaching people for the last 20-some years. And then that got boiled down to a 2-day class. and now I'm boiling it down to an hour. Okay, so and I'm not covering everything. I mean, this is the 2-day course is a very immersive thing, but this is a course that I've taught throughout the United States and certainly to a lot of folks here in Nebraska. To really have, I think I've trained now over 3,500 multidisciplinary professionals in risk communication. So as I met with Cindy and talked to Sam about some of the challenges that you're facing with wellhead protection, and particularly the threat of the nitrate that's out there, you do have a very complex issue. And you do have some huge communication challenges to overcome to get to where you can talk to people and work through the issues of meeting the challenge that the nitrate in the water presents for wellhead protection. So one of my favorite sayings is you can only eat the elephant one bite at a time. You got a huge elephant in the room with this nitrate, and we'll look at a map that really helps us to understand that better. But it's huge, and we're not going to be able to devour that elephant today. But I hope that I'll at least give you some ideas of some tools that you can use and some other ways that after you get together that you can work together to address this huge issue that's facing our state. And then certainly you've got some other experts that have already kind of been there and done that in the room, like Jason Ripa from Wilbur. Had a chance to talk with him a little bit and understand some of the lessons that he learned. And so you do have some resources that have already kind of been in there chewing on that elephant a bit. And so there's some things that we can take away from that experience too, so that your first time is not really the first time, because you've got a brain trust in this state and in this room that you can draw upon to help you work through this. And you've got your consultants out there that can hopefully help you with that too, including figuring out how to secure funding and things like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kind of plow into this a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is just help define what risk communication is and what are some of the key principles that you need to understand about it so that you can see why this might be a tool for you. So I mentioned that it's a science-based approach. And it's not just Steve or Dr. Cavell and all that's calling this a science. It's the National Academy of Sciences recognizing that there is a body of knowledge out there called risk communication, that it is a precise way to communicate with lay publics on issues involving high concern and low trust situations or other things that are sensitive or controversial. Now it's important when you look at that and understand this, like who gets to decide whether an issue is high concern or whether the people that are talking about the issue are, where's the low trust? Who gets to decide that? Whether you're communicating in a high concern, low trust environment. Who decides that?
Your audience.
Your audience. Okay, it's important to understand that. And whether something's sensitive or controversial, it may be sensitive going in. It's usually controversial after the communication starts to happen. Maybe not going into it, but you open your mouth and start saying some things, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I'm passing along technically correct, accurate information. I'm doing my job as a public steward of this resource or this issue, and I'm getting a very adverse reaction to that. And I'm telling the truth. So why is there low trust? Well, a lot of times we have to understand that it's always up to our audience whether we're trustworthy or not. You know you're ethical people, but you can't assume that walking in there that there's something you're about to say or they've had a beef with your agency or your department or your municipality, and they've got baggage coming into that situation that had nothing to do with why you're there that particular day or evening, but that baggage is there, and all of a sudden they're sizing you up and decide whether they want to hear. And some people don't like to hear what you have to say. Okay? So it's very important to understand that if people are reacting to you, it's not that you're not trustworthy, it's to understand where the audience is. And that's another reason why some of the things I'll share with you where risk communication can help you address that issue in how you shape the communication environment and then what passes along in that environment once you do start to communicate. Okay? Very important. You cannot take that for granted. And you can't take it personal either if you're starting to get adverse reactions from people that maybe even you get along with on any other issue just fine, but when you start talking about nitrate, all of a sudden people clam up or they get very adversarial, okay? So I want to make sure we really define risk communication. And so I've got 3 definitions there. I think there's one definition in particular that, you know, if I just came up and gave you a pop quiz and said, what's risk communication mean? There's probably one definition up there that probably fits that to a T. But the other 2 definitions may be a little bit different. And this isn't a multiple choice. These are all correct ways to define and understand what risk communication is. So let's take a look at that first bullet. What are the key words in that first definition?
Purposeful exchange.
Purposeful exchange.
Perceptions.
Perceptions. Those are the hot words in that definition, and we need to understand what that means. So purposeful exchange, what typically happens in government communications, and I'm not here as, you know, as a current public servant, I'm not throwing public servants under the bus here, just kind of calling it like I've done it and I've seen it. A lot of times what happens is we have to impart information to the public. We have to. It's the law, it's our moral and our professional obligation, we have to do that. But what ends up happening a lot of times is we almost in a way take information that we're supposed to put out there and we take all this technical stuff and we kind of throw it over the fence at the public. And a lot of times we don't even expect or count on or want feedback. You're public stewards, you're doing your job, you're getting paid to do your job. And I'm paid to tell you this, so why do and I'm paid by you to tell you this, so why do I need to listen to you? Or, you know, like the facts are the facts, the science is science, now deal with it. Well, if all we're doing is imparting information and not providing for an opportunity to make sure that the audience is understanding it correctly, and that it somehow their understanding the information might help us make better policy, better public decisions. If we're not providing a feedback channel, that starts the ball rolling for controversy. And that's what a lot of times what happens. We're checking our box like we're supposed to pass information, but we're not thinking about how this information could really be misperceived or how it might be affecting something else adjacent to the issue at hand, and then we wonder why we get adverse reactions because we weren't ready for that. So purposeful exchange means we have to do more than just pass correct information. And purposeful means I have a desired specific goal that is something a little more than checking a box, and that somehow or another this is going to help the community, the public, be part of my resource management role, and that together we're going to come to the same place on what we need to do with this information. So that's a lot more than just chucking studies out there, okay? Perceptions is important too. What we know from the risk communication science, and a lot of it is ensconced in behavioral science, a lot of it, but some of it's pure communication research too, that people, what they perceive is going on is what's going on. That their perception of the consequences of what they're perceiving is real to them. And the challenge for the technical experts is you see people reacting to information, either overreacting or underreacting to your information because they don't have your knowledge. Even though you just tossed a study at them, they don't know how to comprehend it correctly. And when people misunderstand things, they can't help themselves but to default in a negative perception of what's being said, and they want to say no to it because now they're fearful of it, they're frightened of it, and they may not know whether they trust you on that issue. They might trust you on something else, but they may not trust you on this one thing. So we got to understand, and it's tough for technical people to sit there and try to swat away the boogeyman that you feel like you're probably fighting with the public all the time. Okay? And that's actually part of the problem. We have to help people walk back from the perceived consequence of what they're taking away from the information. Not in a confrontational way, But we have to help them, give them information or visuals or something that helps them understand that the consequence of this information that they're perceiving is really not there. Okay, not that they're dumb or anything else, but that we need to help them understand where their perception should be so that we actually get on the same page with what the technical information is telling us. That second definition, my guess is if I asked you all which one of those definitions is your favorite definition, my guess is that most of the people in the room want to raise their hand on number 2. Is that basically imparting information about risk? Is that about right? Okay. And I would drive home now this third definition. Perhaps as important, if not more important than the other 2. What are the key words, the hot words in that definition?
Losing something of value. The probability.
Yep. And that's huge. That is a huge understanding of what risk communication is and what it helps us to address. Okay? Because everyone, how many folks do we have that work for government here? Okay. Everything you do, you're doing for the public trust, right? You are serving the public. And everything you do on their behalf is a benefit, right? Yeah, but when you decide you're going to build this new thing, all of a sudden this new thing that's going to be a benefit for everyone, whether it's a dam or it's this, it's that, the other thing, all of a sudden, depending on where you want to build that, now it's a not in my backyard. Yeah, I want it, but put it on his property, not mine. Okay? And so that benefit that you're dangling and that you're working on and that you go to work to provide your citizens every single day, at some point is going to be perceived by somebody as causing them to lose something they value. And the problem is value, the perceptions of the value is a very subjective matter. And my guess is, well, most of you probably have very strong technical backgrounds, you process information in an objective, quantifiable way, and you try to figure out how you distribute the benefit over a population, and you understand its impact on a macro level. But that's not where your public is. The lay public perceives information not on an objective level, but the exact opposite, a subjective level. They want to know what this is going to do to me, not what the benefit is. What's the cost to me of the supposed greater good? And then you wonder why people start to fight you on things that you thought were a great carrot that you were dangling. And they don't process, the lay public does not process information for the most part in a quantifiable way. They do it in a quantitative way. They qualify it. A qualitative way, okay? They are qualifying the technical information about what does it mean to this, 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 and this. And that's, their minds start getting off of the objective facts, okay? And when you start looking at the benefit and you say, well, look, this is going to help this population, what you end up really getting is somebody not being able to look past the end of their nose. They're not looking at the distribution of the risk they perceive or the benefit they perceive. They're looking at it from what is this going to do exactly to my property, and that usually equals not in my backyard, NIMBY. And that macro level where you're looking at like, no, if I do this wellhead protection thing right here, I affect this spot. People look at it on a micro level. The lay public looks at a micro level like this is exactly what's happening to me. So if you're ever to throw out this, well, you know, there's a 1 in a billion chance or 1 in a million, 1 in 100 chance, blah, blah, blah. Every person that hears you say something like that thinks the one is them. And if you got a room with 200 people in it, you got 200% thinking they're the 1%. Okay, so we got to think about how our information gets received. So it's very important to understand what risk communication science is telling us and the things that we can do to address these challenges. Those are challenges to understand that and to work with them. So, some very practical concepts about risk communication. One, we have to understand that perception does equal reality for the person that has that perception. It is their reality. And we can't ignore that. Like a lot of times we want to because we don't want to dignify things that just don't show up in our science. But we have to deal with it or you're not going to get a public moving in your direction if you don't. The other thing that's really important too is that communication is back at zero, and sometimes you're even worse than that. So the point being that you really, if you're going to apply these techniques, you want to get to a point where these principles and these things are just become part of who you are as a communicator and as a professional. So that these things are second nature and you don't have to think about it, and it's a sustained and disciplined use of these techniques. And then, and there's some situations where you absolutely have to have risk communication if you're going to get through a tough communication challenge, a tough project. But I would say that the principles you use there actually work even when the hackles aren't there. They're just great. They're great principles of communication, period. I think the other thing that happens too is we kind of turn these techniques and these skills off and on. And if you want something to end up becoming second nature and knowing these techniques will actually never hurt you, they'll never harm you, even in a non-emotional, non-controversial situation, but just keep it on and use it across all these audiences. And a lot of times we kind of like, well, I'm going to do it at this public meeting, but then you get on the phone and you're chewing somebody out, and it's like, wait a minute, what happened? Or if you're sending documents out, what are you doing in your documents to help people end up in this place that you would if you were able to actually stand there and talk to them at the same time? So, just some practical things. And I think it's always important too. You've got to know the history with that audience on any number of issues that are out there, either with your agency on other closely related topics. You just need to know what's going on out there and have some cultural awareness in some things too. An urban audience is probably not going to respond the same way as a rural audience is going to be to some of the things you need to talk to them about. So we got to take that into account as well. So the goals continued here really is that we want to create an environment based on trust and credibility. This is one of the biggest things that risk communication techniques will do, is to create an environment based on trust and credibility. And I want you to think about that. If you're talking to people and you're spending their tax dollars and you're creating benefit, but they're perceiving a probability of losing something they value, how good is that conversation going to go if there's a lack of trust and credibility? And I want you to think about that because you're actually on their behalf making life decisions. And you're making life decisions that may have consequences for them that you didn't intend or didn't perceive yourself. So when you start hearing bad news, how well does that go over, having the neighbor telling you something over the fence versus your doctor telling you you've got cancer? I mean, you've got to really think about how important it is to have trust. I mean, who do you make your most important decisions with in your life? You make them, and do you share your life and your values with people you don't trust? Okay, so risk communication is very important in understanding how people really live as just down to that primal level as human beings. Okay, and Will Rogers said this best. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that means sometimes we got to talk more about our, why we're committed to what we're doing, as opposed to here's this benefit I'm dangling in front of you. That, hey, look, I live here in this community too. I have to deal. I've got to drink this water too, and I'm doing this for my kids and your family because we're all in this together. Well, that's a caring and empathy statement that you probably want to proceed all your technical gobbledygook, because they need to know that whatever it is you're about to tell them next, I'm in this with you, and I get it. This is important for all of us, and I share that value with you in a sense of community. Okay? The other thing I think you want at the end of the day, and how the risk communication techniques and things will help you, is you don't want people fighting with you. Doesn't mean they have to agree with you, but you at least want to have a collaborative conversation and problem solve together, and get to a place where the minds are opening, not closing, and the backs are stiffening, and the knives and the lawyers are coming out, and all that good stuff. All right, so you really want to put people in a place where we're all in this together finding the solution. So that's another thing risk communication can help you do. And at the end of the day, and you already are this, but to help them, the audience, because the perception's on their part, is to just ultimately use these techniques and work with people, take the technical stuff you're already giving them, but package it and work it in a slightly different way. You're ultimately going to actually build more confidence in the professionalism and the commitment of your organization. It's going to up your game, and all you're doing is applying a couple of different ways of presenting information you've already been giving them. Okay? And I'm sorry, we're not going to have time to tell you exactly how you can do that, but we're just going to whet your appetite a little bit. Now, all this is about, the whole thing of risk communication is based on these 4 theories. And I'm only going to get into the threat perception theory a little bit here. But these are the things that if you ever wondered, like you're going into a meeting and all of a sudden the meeting went south on you, or even you're talking to a loved one and all of a sudden you're like, well, look, I was having this great conversation, all of a sudden something just turned and you're not quite sure what it was. Well, what the risk communication science tells us is something you said or something you did or showed, something we visibly observed, it triggered one of these. These are actually barriers. They're not just theories, they're barriers to effective communication. And there are things that we say and do that trigger one of those. And once you trigger one of those barriers, it usually makes the other 2 or 3 come right in behind it. But you get one up, then you're not going to have trust and credibility in that moment in time with that audience. Okay? So it's important to understand that these barriers are out there. These are the things that made the meetings go south. It's that the conversation with my wife that made me sleep on the couch that night. Okay? So you've got to understand what those things are. And again, there's something for you to dig in a little bit further down the road. But let's talk about risk perception, because as we relate this now to nitrate and wellhead protection, we've got to understand why people get upset and their perception of risk. And what are the things that cause people stress? And again, whether it's the perception of losing something of value or whatever, but these are the things where, you may not, when you're talking about a wellhead protection thing, are you thinking about all these other issues? Or are you just thinking about wellhead protection? And do you realize that subject is triggering all these other thoughts in the lay audience? Okay? So you got to understand how that issue where you're trying to do something good for somebody is also tripping on things that you probably didn't even contemplate. But for them, all this stuff is their life's flashing in front of them. And it's important to understand how are things, information and sources of information, how are they perceived as whether they're representing a lower level of risk to them or a higher level of risk. So if something you're talking about makes that audience feel that they're not in control, or that you're not even in control of it, you can see that will get people more upset than if they have a sense that there's control. So there's a control somewhere. There's knowledge that can manage and shape this risk. So we need to understand these things, because that's when you start thinking about your purposeful exchange of information, how is your information going to be perceived across these kinds of attributes? Okay. There's some more here. This is, we're over here, usually, in most cases, hopefully, right? And our lay audience is almost always starting out from right here. So another thing that's important, now we're shifting in, so we talked about the risk barrier, risk perception barrier. One takeaway I want to give you on trust is a whole bunch of other stuff about how people are perceived as trustworthy or not. But one of the things that's very important, because this will play into some of the outreach and communication things you're going to want to think about on wellhead protection and helping people grasp what's going on with the nitrate, is understanding how powerful visuals are. So when I say nonverbal, that's a combination of certainly body language, if you're the messenger. And people, you ever heard them say, don't let them see you sweat? Or they're sizing you up? Well, that's a primal instinct. We cannot help but size people up. You've already sized me up. Okay? As soon as Cindy introduced me, you were sizing me up. I knew you were. You didn't know you were, maybe, but you were doing it. And I'm looking at body language right now, trying to say, should I run for the back? There is no back door. Dean, I'm coming through you. So that's the shortest way out of here. So if I'm in trouble, that's where I'm going. But we do that. People do that. So it's the nonverbals are part of it, but visual information is extremely important to understand too. So if you've got some really slick study and you don't have a visual way to help simplify the complexity of that data, you're hurting yourselves. Because this is what we know about nonverbal and visual information. It carries 50 to 75% of the message content that you're trying to get across. It's always, not maybe, it's always noticed intensely by the audience. And if it can be interpreted the wrong way, it will be. Not might be. In a high concern, low trust communication environment, if the visuals, the body language, the graphics can be taken the wrong way, they will be taken the wrong way. Okay? And this is the scariest part. Visual information and nonverbal body language always overrides text and verbal. So if you're saying one thing and they're seeing something else, what they're seeing is going to override what you say. And they can read your study all day long, but if you've got visuals that are in conflict with what your study is telling them, they're going to hang their hat on the visuals. Okay? And a lot of technical documents don't go far enough. They got technical graphs and charts, but at some point, if your ultimate product is not just for your technical peers, but it's a public document and something that you're trying to get your community to coalesce and rally around, you had better think about the kind of graphics you need to get them to see what you're saying. Think about that. Get them to see what you're saying. Because again, if you got a room full of 200 people and you're saying something and you're not showing them what they should be seeing, and you could be saying it, but they're not seeing it, you're going to have 200 different mind's eye view of what your words mean. You have to give them a common picture. Have to give them a common picture. And you've heard the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But if you're developing graphics that you need 1,000 words to explain, you're going to flunk the text. Okay? So somewhere in all your technical brilliance that you do your work in, you need, like a guy like me, I call myself Joe Six-Pack. You need somebody that is not as smart at this stuff as you are to actually look at what you're trying to do and ask them, hey, what does this say to you? I called it the PAT test. A couple years ago when I still had my own company, our office manager, Pat, was not a risk communication expert. She used to be an IT manager for First Data Resources, and she's not an engineer. She's not an expert in most of the work we did, but before we'd send anything to the client or put it out in front of the public, we'd always have Pat read it. And it was amazing because we thought, oh man, I know it says this. I know we're showing that. And Pat's like, I ain't getting this. And so we had to get it right, get it past Pat before we would turn it out and know, okay, now pass the Pat test. There's another example of that. Anybody heard of Napoleon's idiot? No? So Napoleon Bonaparte, he actually had a guy that was a very, I think, in this politically correct word you wouldn't really want to use, I wouldn't say the person had Down syndrome, but they would refer to somebody as retarded or slow back in the 1800s. This was a person who was kind of, a dullard. But Napoleon would write orders and other things for his other generals, and he would have this guy, they called him idiot, and they didn't mean anything mean by it. Back then you could call somebody idiots just like they're not as smart as fast as the rest of them, but you didn't mean it in an insulting way. But he had this person on his staff who would read his orders, and Napoleon tell him, read this back to me. Tell me what this says. And if he couldn't read it back to the way that he meant to say it, he would change the order until his idiot would say, okay, that's what it says. Okay? So think about your audience, and do you have somebody in your organization that can give you a kind of a clean set of eyes and a very lay mindset to look at what you're trying to put out there so that what you hope to get across is in fact what's getting across. You don't have to guess, just find your pat test. Okay? All right. So I know I only kind of covered risk perception and one point on trust determination, but I do want you to understand what these theories or these communication barriers, like what's going on with them. So those are the 4 barriers that usually get us into trouble in these meetings when we're communicating with the lay audience. This is the effect they have on the communication dynamic. Okay? And then what are the solutions? How do you, if those barriers pop up out of the ground at you, how do you knock those barriers down? How do you get through them? So this is just a very simple way of kind of summarizing all that for you. Now I want you to take a look at the 7 cardinal rules of risk communication. If you're communicating with the public, I would, and especially in technical information and something you definitely think could get them excited in some fashion, you got to ask yourself, are you applying these cardinal rules to your information? And what's that? Plan careful and evaluate efforts. That's thinking purposeful exchange. So listen to the specific concerns. All right, so I want to give you, I mentioned Dr. Peter Sandman is one of the great godfathers or founding fathers of risk communication. I want you to get a little take on this idea of risk communication in his own words. And I know, Sam, you've been out talking about a lot of stuff, and I recognize it looks like Sandman's kind of at the anchor of a lot of the things that you've been out sharing with people. So you could probably take a 5-minute nap now.
So what am I saying? I'm trying to kind of sweep away the underbrush. It's not that people are stupid. It's not that people can't figure out the data. People, in fact, do figure out the data. People are extraordinarily good at figuring out probabilistic data when they want to. They do it when they go to Las Vegas. They do it when they buy a mortgage. I would put a variable rate mortgage up against any risk assessment that's been done in the United States to date as a complex probabilistic document, and people figure them out. And it's not that you've done such a poor job of explaining yourselves. You can do a better job. Presentational skills do matter. But you haven't done that bad a job of educating the public, of explaining the risks. And we still have this miserable 0.2 correlation between whether it's going to kill people and whether it's going to upset them. So the question is, why that correlation? I'm going to try to answer that question. Now, the word we're talking about is risk. Now, I suspect most of you know what risk means to experts, to risk assessors. But if you don't, it's very straightforward. It's a multiplication of 2 factors. Magnitude, how bad is it when it happens, times probability, how likely is it to happen. You get your best measure of magnitude, your best measure of probability, you multiply those by each other, and you come out with something like expected annual mortality. And you know you have a future risk assessment if you can say expected annual mortality with a smile. They don't just expect it, they look forward to it. Now sometimes that calculation of magnitude times probability is based on hard data. Automobile fatalities, for example, we go out on the highway and count them. For most risks that lead us to big controversies, though, it's not based on hard data at all. If we look at Title III, we look at most of the risk controversies that dominate our society, and the data are not at all hard. And I suspect most of you know this. If we're talking about acute risk, we're looking at a branch of magic called fault tree analysis. And if we look at chronic risk, then we are trying to reason from what happens to small numbers of rodents exposed to one substance at a time in large quantities for short periods of time. and to make judgments about what might happen to large numbers of human beings exposed to small quantities of lots of substances at once over a long period of time. Okay? That is to say, we all know what part of their bodies risk assessors pull those numbers out of. After 20 years of working with technical people, at last I found a technical field sloppier than my own. It may not make you similarly happy, but in any case, whether the data are hard or soft, and they're usually soft in this field, what risk means to risk assessors is this multiplication of magnitude times probability. And the problem is that's not what risk means to anybody else. May not even be what risk means to risk assessors when they go home at night, but at least in the office they mean magnitude times probability, and no one else does. So let's play fast and loose with the terminology. Let's redefine terms. Let's take what the risk assessor means by risk, this multiplication of magnitude times probability. And for the next couple of hours, let's call that hazard. Then let's take what the public means by risk, all the things that people are worried about, that experts ignore. And I'm going to disaggregate that. I'm going to spread those things out in a minute. But for the moment, let's look at it as one thing and call it outrage. And that leads to the only math I want to offer you today, a new definition of risk. I would suggest that properly considered, risk is hazard plus outrage. Now that plus sign upsets people sometimes, particularly technical people. So for those of you with a technical background, I have a different definition. Risk is a function of hazard and outrage. If you don't know what that means hazard plus outrage in their code. But somehow they find that much more precise. Now, this is a redefinition that makes a difference, and let me try to explain why. The way the problem is usually seen, and remember, the problem is this miserable 0.2 correlation between whether it's going to kill you and whether it's going to upset you. The way that problem is usually seen is as a problem of misperception. It's as if the experts were in direct contact with the platonic essence of risk, while the public was denied that direct contact, forced to perceive the risk and doing a crummy job. Okay, so that, if you read the literature or if you listen to experts talking to each other, they're all the time saying, the public just doesn't understand, the public just doesn't get it, doesn't perceive the risk accurately. Let's get a test on that. Would you raise your hand if you had ever said that to a colleague? The public just doesn't understand.
Anybody here?
Lots of hands. Good, I'm talking to the right audience. Okay. Now, what I'm suggesting here is a different way of framing the problem, a much more symmetrical way of framing the problem. I'm arguing that the experts, when they talk about risk, focus on hazard and ignore outrage. They therefore systematically overestimate the risk when the hazard is high and underestimate the risk when the hazard is low, because all they're doing is looking at the hazard. And the public, in precise parallel, focuses on outrage and ignores hazard. The public, therefore, overestimates the risk when the outrage is high and underestimates the risk when the outrage is low. What I'm arguing is that 0.2 correlation I keep talking about, far from being the result of misperception or misunderstanding, is in fact the result of a definitional dispute. I'm arguing that 0.2 is the genuine correlation between hazard and outrage, two nearly independent variables that have one interesting thing in common. They're both called risk by different groups of people. Now, as I look at your faces, some of you buy it, okay, and some of you don't. Let me tell you what some of you were thinking, particularly the engineers who raised their hands before. Some of you are thinking, okay, this is new terminology for old concepts. What Sandman is calling hazard is real risk, objective risk. What Sandman is calling outrage is subjective, social science, artsy-fartsy risk. Now, I can't keep you from thinking that, but I want to be very clear that I'm not saying that. Okay? And if, in fact, your standard of which of these two is real and which isn't, which is objective and which is subjective, is the normal standard of science, that is, replicability of measurement, we have better data on outrage than we do on hazard. For most of these risks, I can tell you to 3 decimal places what they do to people's opinions. You can't tell me to 3 decimal places what they do to people's bodies. So if we're going to get into a pissing match over which of these two is science, I am in grave danger of winning. But I'll cut you slack and I will concede that hazard is real, and I won't dismiss dead bodies as, oh well, that's just hazard. But I want you to concede that outrage is real, and not dismiss angry or frightened people as that's just outrage. Because the core of my message, the core of my argument, is that outrage is as real as hazard. It's as measurable as hazard. It's as manageable as hazard. It's as much a part of risk as hazard. And it's as much a part of your job as hazard.
So, Sandman points to what I refer to as a literacy gap. Again, you know, you guys are probably looking at things from that objective, quantifiable, population distribution, macro level, and as he mentioned there in the parallel opposite. So risk communication principles really help us to bridge that literacy gap. And I think it's important to understand that some of these issues where you think that there's nothing you can do to get people turned around, I'm here to say that's a bunch of bull. If you apply the best communication practices on complex technical issues when people are likely to be upset or frightened and emotionally charged, risk communication will absolutely, positively help you work through those tough issues. I can't tell you how many projects I've worked on where we snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat because we put on an A game for risk communication techniques. And it doesn't hurt to know, you know, conflict management principles and other things, which is a whole different school and school of thought in a different class, but the reality is this stuff is manageable. And maybe, you know, some of you, depending on where you're from, you're like a one deep person in your office. So one of the things we'll talk about as far as the way forward on dealing with the wellhead protection with nitrate is how do we leverage resources and things for the benefit of everybody so that you're not one deep trying to tackle an issue that's bigger than, you know, it's as big as our state, okay? And I think it's also important that, you know, I mean, ultimately this is part of your job. No one probably told you if you're the technical manager of something, you're a water system operator, no one told you you needed to be a communicator. But, I mean, we have to communicate to share information with people, and so the question becomes, can we give you some extra tools in how you do that, okay, that you can apply yourself. So let's take a look at your environment with wellhead protection, and particularly the nitrate. I think right now, you know, my perception, which I guess is now my reality, right? My perception is that people are perceiving the hazard as low, and there's kind of a low outrage until you go start to talk to people about it. Okay? And so that's an interesting challenge because we do have examples in this state. People are under administrative orders now. We've got the city of Hastings putting in a $40 million water treatment system for the nitrate and uranium that's in their water. They're not waiting for an administrative order because they have already had to shut down wells. So, you know, it's out there, and I'm going to show you some maps that drive that point home. It's out there, and sticking our heads in the sand and ignoring it is not going to make the problem go away. But who wants to talk about it? You know, nobody. I think the minute you start bringing this up, somebody's thinking you're pointing a finger at it. And the reality is we are all contributing to the problem. You know, and no one's doing it on purpose. And I think that's part of the thing we have to think about when we start messaging and devising a way to help people get their heads around this challenge our state is facing, is that this isn't about pointing fingers and it's not about blame. We know more now about past practices. We come from a place where things used to be out of sight, out of mind. And nobody, I mean, farmers get upset and worried like, oh, we're going to try to shut down them and their irrigation and all that. We're not trying to do that. And no one said they purposely, you know, tried to do that. I know farmers think they're the greatest conservationists and stewards of the environment that God ever created. And I'm not here to argue with that. But we've done things that we didn't know better at the time, and there are things that we know better about now that maybe we can start to try to employ. So this isn't about blame, and denying what's going on isn't going to help anything either. We are all part of the challenge and we're all part of the solution. And that's got to be the tone of our messaging. So urban guys, you're just as responsible as the rural guys. We've all contributed to this situation that we face. And not a one of us did it on purpose. But we're all going to be stuck with the bill, and our children are going to be stuck with unsustainable drinking water supplies if we don't do something. Okay? So I think that's something we've got to think about, the challenge that we face, because this is enormous. And it's an overwhelming task. There's not enough money to go around to just go and clean everything up. And so we are mostly in a reactionary mode to where, you know, the plume's creeping into our wellhead area, and then we do something. So, but we already know that prevention is more cost effective than cure. So what can we do to you know, leverage the limited resources we have to start trying to address the issue before we go into the drastic action of an administrative order and shut down our wellheads and then going out trying to find new sources? Okay? So we do have this is a huge challenge. And I think the other thing here is the whole thing, you know, it's an out of sight, out of mind thing. And that's again where the visuals are going to play a huge part. So I think, you know, the big thing we got to think about here is each one of your jurisdictions is kind of probably looking at this like, well, this is my deal, this is my challenge, this is my problem. And I think what we've got to do is, one, we've got to be proactive, not reactive in addressing this issue. And I think the teamwork when it comes to that is, what can you learn from Jason? Give him a call, talk to him, and find out some of the lessons learned. One of the brilliant things I heard he did is he knew that everybody would start freaking out if you know, they thought he was coming in and trying to test for DEQ. And what he did is he set up a system where he asked to do tests, but that the people's properties, the owner of the property and the well would be anonymous, and every well that was tested had a number. And only he knows what number belonged to who. Because what's important isn't what, you know, what source was what, because there is no single non-point source to this challenge. So he kept the anonymity of the testing, but you could at least get your arms around and see from the testing what the problem was. And then they started applying for the grants to address it. And not one person got stuck with a bill, no one person got shut down and fined. And so that was a brilliant move to just kind of like deal with the fear of regulation as opposed to let's focus on compliance and solution. Okay, so learn from each other. And teamwork, and the other part of the teamwork, I think, is to leverage resources. Probably about 90%, and I've got the experts that can tell me I'm completely dead wrong about this, but my guess is that about 90%, 95% of what you need to tell the public at any given location about nitrate and wellhead protection is the same information. What the remaining 10 to 5% of that is the specific data for your site. Okay? So is everybody going to run out of here and go out and create a 90% product individually all over again each time? Or can maybe collectively you pool your resources and you come up with a strategy together? Some people get a grant and they do this part, but you know the rest of the state can use it. But you're doing this working side by side and leveraging the limited resources so that you can put information together and you know, a website or whatever, get these different things, or training something, and leverage that so that one jurisdiction can cover that part of it, knowing the other guys are going for a grant and they're going to cover this next piece. But when it's all done, you've got this little monet of these little dots that look like a blotch of paint, but when you step back, you have a complete strategy and you have all the tools arrayed that everybody can use. So that you're not spending the money over and over again recreating the same damn fact sheet. And then you spend the money where it really matters after you've laid that groundwork on actually the solution, the technical solution. But if you can't get people around the idea of what you need to do, you're gonna spend most of your time and money fighting people to get them to even work with you. And that's why the strategy is important, and that using risk communication in your materials is gonna be vital to the success of making this go as well as it possibly can in a time and a cost-effective manner. But if you're going out there not understanding risk communication, you're just basically not starting a conversation, pissing everybody off, you probably just set yourself back a year or two, maybe longer. Okay? So let's think about that. And proactive means don't wait for the, it's there. The nitrate's there. You're gonna wait till it gets up to 10 and you gotta start shutting stuff down, or what are you gonna do? So my favorite saying, you can only eat the elephant one bite at a time. So let's start thinking about how can we start chewing on this elephant. So just gather the facts for your area. We've got we've got to figure out a way to develop strong visual information that tells the story in a way that all the words that you have to offer can. And especially for something out of sight, out of mind, that's going to be absolutely critical. The reality is, even though you're jurisdictionally, you may be individually responsible for your wellhead area, there's nothing to say you can't build a coalition of advocates and other people to help you deal with this and to leverage and share your resources. My goodness, you got Dean Edson here from the Nebraska Association of Resource Districts. They have got to be one of the strongest allies you could have in this effort. You got Health and Human Services got a dog in the hunt. What can you do to create advocates? Are you spending any time sharing the information you have with the Farm Bureau? Not to go in there and accuse and get them all defensive, but to actually say, look, we've got challenges and we need your help to help educate and inform people. Okay? So you got to think about the advocates. We already know Sam is probably the last person some people want to see and hear from on this issue. She's the DEQ, man, don't let them get in my business. Okay, so who else can be an advocate to help educate their peers? So you got to start thinking smart, working smarter, not harder, trying to do it all yourself. Okay, make sure that's my point, make sure you get the right messenger for the right audience. Level your resources, create a plan so that you guys are not all starting from scratch. Find the sweet spots. I think it's important if we as a group, a collection of operators and municipal managers and resource experts, can we speak with one voice? If we put the materials together, collaborate, yes we can, so that we're all on the same page. And I think that's going to take some time and effort. And I think this is patience and persistence. I know, Jason was telling me his biggest advice to all you to, hopefully, if you don't find yourself in this place or you're looking at it, is just to be patient in the time that it takes to work through the challenges of getting people on board. But, the problem's not going away. That's the thing. It is not going away, and it's not going to get better with time. Think about trust and credibility. Who can you get to be advocates? Well, what we know on environmental issues, that these are the kinds of people that, even though there may not be technical experts in nitrate and what you do, there are people in communities that are perceived as very credible. So it's good to know that. You may not, as a technical peer, say, though, they're not my peer. But if you can find people and get them smart enough and give them good information they can share with other people, they are a message multiplier, and they are trusted and credible. I find when I work on environmental issues and things, I always want to get a school principal involved. Who are you trusting with your kids all day? They may not know squat about nitrate, but they are actually perceived in every community. I don't care what size town it is, I always work with school principals when I've got environmental issues I'm trying to work through a community. And they're worth their weight in gold, and they're certainly able to get up to speed on the issues. And people trust them. So they're great message multipliers to have on your team. Again, just some things to think about with your messengers. Pick them wisely. Make sure that somebody's not just good at spewing out all the technical data, but that they can actually express caring and empathy. They're not going to get impatient and short with people that ask stupid questions that you think are stupid. Right? They got to have somebody who's really got some patience and good people skills. Because again, we're trying to establish trust and credibility, and And people want to know that you care before they care what you know. Okay, so think about who you're going to send out there. Visual information that demystifies. This is probably going to be the single greatest area that you need to put your energy into, is giving people visual information to help them get their heads around this thing they can't see.
8 sites for further investigation.
This is a super fun site, Tucson, Arizona, involving the Tucson Airport.
Testing began at the suspected sites. During this testing, the geology was found to be comprised of 2 aquifers separated by what is termed a confining layer. This confining layer acts as a barrier which prevents the exchange between the 2 aquifers. It was determined that this confining layer would prevent any possible base contaminants from reaching the lower aquifer. Therefore, testing and cleanup efforts are focused on the upper aquifer. It was determined that the upper aquifer groundwater is flowing in a northwesterly direction at a rate of 800 feet per year. Numerous test wells were installed at various locations. Soil and groundwater samples were gathered. These samples were fully analyzed and the results were available in 1990. No problem areas were found in the soil. However, initial testing discovered trichloroethylene, or...
So I'm just going to stop this right here. The point of showing you this, so back when I was a Fed, the Arizona Air National Guard was in a multi-party lawsuit over elevated cancer, and it's a super fun site. They had spilled jet fuel, all kinds of stuff that goes on at airports. And so the EPA came in, and of course they made everybody a responsible party like they do, and lawsuits were flying and all that. And we had done testing and testing and testing, and the Guard was trying to say, we are not a point source for what you're finding here. And people couldn't understand, how can you possibly sink a well on your installation and you're finding all the stuff in there, how can you sit there and say you're not responsible? So we had study after study that told why we weren't responsible. And it took us the time to finally create this little short video. I think we spent about $5,000 on this thing. You're just getting a little snippet of it. But we were finally able to demystify the thing that people couldn't see. And every time we explained exactly what they're seeing, every person had their own mind's eye view of what was being said. So we finally had to show them, this is what's going on, and this is why all those things you're seeing in the water are flowing from off our site and underneath our bay, our part of the airport, and we are not responsible for that. And after we showed this at public meetings and released it to the news media, within a week of that, the National Guard was dropped from the lawsuit. And we had spent over a year trying to tell people we weren't responsible, and it took a 5-minute video clip to take us off the lawsuit. Okay? You cannot underestimate the power of the visuals that help to tell the story and help people understand what you all are facing. And what are you facing? Here it is. And you don't want that brown and that red, but we've got a lot of stuff going on out there. I mean, we're all in this together. This is affecting the whole state. Here you've got administrative orders already going on. You've got communities shutting down wells all over the state already, even in the absence of the administration. Hastings, $40 million. They weren't waiting to get slapped with an order to address the issue. Okay, and you got lots. You can see the treatment. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on out there, and we're just all in this together. Now, that doesn't look good for Nebraska. If people actually cared how we look from a global view, I mean, we're like this big red sore thumb in the nation when you look at it from that perspective. And I know we want to be number one, but we don't want to be number one in nitrate, do we? So, and that's not the kind of go big red we want. So I think we've got a real issue here, and we've got to start educating people in a way to say, look, we've got something we need to fix. This is our moonshot. This is where we're gonna be the guys that figure this out. We're not worried about how it got there. We know it's there, and we just got to start doing some things, different farming practices, other things, and still get high yields. There's a lot of examples of how we can address this and still be successful in in the things that we do and the way we live our lives. The trend lines are not going in a direction that we want to see. Everything's still going up. So, we're well past the beginning of the beginning. Anyway, we're going to wrap up here very quickly here. Again, risk communication can be applied. It's not just stand-up presentations. It's in every way that we choose to communicate with people. Okay, take the time to have a purposeful exchange of information, not just a toss of information. This is an effort that's going to require continuous awareness and outreach. You've got to try to bring community leaders, other people, other opinion leaders in to get them up to speed on what we're trying to address. What does that mean? I mean, get the state, get your county supervisors in there, council members, mayors, state senators. I mean, we've got to help people really see those pictures I just showed you to understand what we're dealing with. Make sure, start making sure the kids are informed and have them bringing home stuff to mom and dad. Help them, other forums where you can do that. Public open houses to help share more information. Just have an information fair, if you will, about it. So some of the key things for outreach and finding some sweet spots. And again, inform your stakeholders in non-offensive ways of what's going on. I mean, maybe you start, if you're sending out if you're a water system operator, maybe with a bill, again, if you get your material set, like everybody can use almost the same stuff, maybe you've got something you insert in the water bill that just starts introducing the concept. It doesn't say, we got to fix something right now, but it just starts saying, hey, nitrate in water, what is it? And what does that mean to us? What does it mean for the future? Just start spooling information out to help people get their heads around this and start getting some momentum so that you can start focusing on solution, but just set the groundwork so people understand the challenge and the threat that we face. And again, it's important not to just focus on the problem, the solution, the way forward. You've got a lot of people, if there are state policies and such that are set in such a way that you don't feel there's enough funding resource out there, maybe we got to start talking to the League of Municipalities and Nebraska